Can everybody hear me? Okay. Did everybody grab a cup of coffee? Everybody's fine? Okay, so my name is Michelle Chiruti, so welcome all. And I'm a third year. I tend to forget it. Third year student at the University of Westminster in London, and I'm from Italy and Brazil. I like to mention them both because both are very important. And today I have the pleasure to introduce the panel on the thematic session Sustainable Development Goal number 1. So that promotes the end of poverty in its all forms everywhere. Today as moderator for this panel we have Mr. Lonny, Director of Operation of Choice Humanitarian. And then we have the panelists that include Ms. Kristin, Second Counselor in the General Relief Society, President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then Mr. Javier Cortés, CEO of COP & Co, former Director of UN Global Compact for Americas. And Nadini Praveen from His Highness the Maharajas Government Law College. As we will not have time for detailed introductions, please see their bios on the website under the SDG number 1. And now we will return the time to Mr. Lonny.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's wonderful to have a beautiful woman start us off, get us going. I am super excited to be here with you today. I hope that you're enjoying the conference and that you are networking with others. What a great opportunity to meet people all over the world and to see what they're doing and learn from each other. It's really exciting. Our purpose today is to talk about poverty. And I hope that each of you will leave here with a commitment to do something. If this discussion does not change you somehow, we've wasted our time. So what I'd like you to do is maybe on a piece of paper or on your phone or whatever, by the end of the discussion, write something that you can do. I love this poem that my mom used to share with me. This is Everett Hale. I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And what I can do, I ought to do. And what I ought to do, by the grace of God, I shall do. So you're only one, but don't let that stop you. I encourage you, if you haven't already seen it, watch the movie, I think it's Mully, M-U-L-L-Y, about a gentleman in Kenya that grew up on the streets and then has made a difference for thousands and thousands of people in Kenya. But there are others all over the world who make a difference. As we think about poverty, I would like you to think about what poverty is. How do we define poverty? And I'm going to give each of the panelists an opportunity to talk about poverty, but I'd like you to do a little activity for me. If you got a piece of paper or if you can imagine, draw a 2x2 grid. So you've got 4 boxes, 2x2. Okay, so you've got 2 rows and 2 columns. On the top, on the box on the left, write rich. And on the above the box on the right, write poor. So the first column is rich, the second column is poor. Then on the top row, write riches. And on the bottom row, write poverty. Okay? So that the top corner box in the column of rich, in the row of riches, you can put a couple of words that describe the riches that rich people have. So think about the riches that the rich have. Okay, now drop down to the bottom row, second column, the poverty of the poor. And often we describe poverty as a lack of, and riches as abundance of. But one thing we often don't think about are the riches of people that we consider poor, the richness of their life, or the poverty of rich people. Another poem that my mom shared with me by Edwin Arlington Robinson, entitled Richard Cory. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from sole to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still he fluttered pulses when he said, "Good morning." And he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light, and went without the meat, and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home all alone and put a bullet through his head. So here in this poem, we have a gentleman described as having everything. But he was alone. He did not have human interaction, and he did not feel valued. So as we think about poverty, and today we're going to mainly deal with lack of things and how we can deal with that. But I want you to also keep in mind that there are other ways that people can be poor that are not necessarily, they don't have to do with their economic status. Now, when we talk about poverty, the World Bank describes extreme poverty as living on less than $1.90 a day. Okay, so there's one measure. Another way to look at it is multidimensional poverty, where we look at lack of education, lack of resources, living conditions, and other things like that. And so there are many different facets of poverty, and there are many ways to try and deal with poverty. And it takes all of us working together. When we think about the three sectors of society, we here mostly represent the civil sector, civil society. And we're passionate about what we're doing. That's what drives us. That's why we do the work we do. But the other two sectors of society are equally important. The public sector, the governments, and bureaucratic organizations that set policy that have tremendous effect on poverty throughout the world, and the private sector, the businesses. That's where the economic growth is generated. That's where money comes from. So how can we engage them? And all three sectors working together to eliminate poverty. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my panel and ask them to talk about, what is poverty and what has their experience been with poverty. And we'll start with Kristin here.
Hello. Okay, we're on. Well, good morning. My name is Kristin Yee, and I'm the second counselor in the Relief Society General Presidency. And I'm honored and privileged to talk about something that is of deep importance in my heart and to many of the Latter-day Saints and to all of you as you are here invested in serving God's children across the earth. Just a little personal experience behind, just some background is I studied illustration and design, but I also received a master's in public administration for the interest of serving the community and the ability to administer public policy that would allow us to serve brothers and sisters across the earth and to be able to eliminate such causes or such forms and diseases as poverty. This topic is of one of deep importance because it is at the heart of the beliefs and principles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, We believe in serving our neighbors, loving God and loving his children. And to think about it, to what Lonny said a little bit, we have to first feel that love for us, for ourselves, feel God's love for our hearts. And once we do feel that love, we're able to look outward and look at other children around us and feel that same love and have that desire to serve them. So it begins with where our hearts are at and our own ability to love and to feel God in our lives and to see him in our lives. That's the beginning of poverty in our own hearts. Sometimes we feel destitute and hollow even though we do good, but we don't feel him in our lives. And he is there, and he desires to bless you as much as the rest of the children on this earth because you are his. Now, poverty's effect and I love the exercise I just did in my paper, The Matrix, Lonny, because poverty is not just a physical space, it's an emotional and spiritual space as well, as each of us can attest to. There is, at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because of that, because the spiritual and the temporal are tied together, we have many programs, and I just want to list some of them off to you to help share what is taking place, which is often not discussed, but we have programs related to the temporal and spiritual well-being of his children and help towards mental and emotional well-being, as well as education. So these are some of the programs include the English Connect program, the Self-Reliance courses, employment services, Deseret Industries, and the Ready for Work program, family services, which is therapy for groups, families, and counseling sessions there, addiction recovery, BYU pathways, transitional services, and much more. You think, how does that have to do with poverty? It has everything to do with poverty. Because if we bless the spirit and the soul, we bless the temporal. The Relief Study organization, of which I'm a part of, and which 7.5 million women across the earth are a part of ministering. They're part of loving God's children. They're part of providing relief, both temporally and spiritually, to God's children. Elder Johnny Whitstow declared that the Relief Study offers relief of poverty, relief of illness, relief of doubt, relief of ignorance, relief of all that hinders the joy and progress of women. What a magnificent commission that is. And there's an increased urgency with poverty across the earth. If I can just quote the UN General Secretary, or Secretary General, he said, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic reversed the steady progress of poverty reduction over the past 25 years. This unprecedented reversal is being further exacerbated by rising inflation and impacts of war in Ukraine. It is estimated these combined crises will lead to an additional 75 to 95 million people living in extreme poverty. So there is an urgency for this as we look at our brothers and sisters across the earth that find themselves in circumstances they never thought they would be in or do not desire to be in. We have an opportunity and a privilege to assist them in this way. And I just want to share some examples on how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is working to reduce the suffering and the poverty across the earth because of our love of our Heavenly Father and his children. In 2021, and this is also with the help of many partners, I must say, and that is key. There are many partners in this work. We do not do this alone. We do this together, and we have to do this together. And so some of the things that have taken place in 2021, the church expended $906 million to help those in need, volunteered approximately 6.8 million hours, served 188 countries and territories, helped 1.74 million people through 114 clean water and sanitation projects, carried out 7 campaigns to end diseases such as diabetes, polio, and measles, distributed 1 billion vaccine doses, supported over 31,000 small-scale family farms, so you think of self-reliance in that space, and produced over 100 million pounds of food. To give you an idea of how many people that would feed, with 3 people being fed for about a day for every 10 pounds of that food. Close to 30 million people being fed in that space. And just recently, the church gave its largest one-time donation to a humanitarian organization of $32 million to the United Nations World Food Program, which assists about 1.6 million people in 9 countries. And we've also been able to assist in many efforts in assisting the refugees in Ukraine. As we know, we have many brothers and sisters in that space who are now starting over or fleeing or are in a place of discomfort for their families and loved ones. And so there are many efforts taking place there as well. And we share these efforts with only the sole purpose of highlighting that we can accomplish this work together. As it says in Mosiah, and this is in the Book of Mormon, we can do this together because our hearts are knit together in unity and in love towards one another. It begins with you and I. It begins with peace in our hearts. It begins with the love of God in our hearts to work together, to see each other for how God sees us, and to have that desire to bless and love as we would want to be blessed and loved. And the cost to end poverty is tremendous. but we can make a difference, not just as faith communities, not as just government operations or as NGOs, but as individuals, families, communities within your own home, within your own neighborhoods. You know people who either are in need both spiritually or temporally, and you have seen that because he has shown you that. And we have an opportunity to assist in that way. Sister Linda K. Burton was the 16th Relief Society General President, and she shared a story that I always appreciated that talks about ministering within our own spaces. She said that she was at a funeral for a stake Relief Society president, and a speaker recalled the woman working with others in her stake to contribute quilts to suffering people in Kosovo during the 1990s. And like the Good Samaritan, she went out of her way to do more as she and her daughter drove a truck filled with those quilts from London to Kosovo. On her journey home, she received an unmistakable spiritual impression that sank deep into her heart. The impression was this: what you have done is a very good thing. Now go home, walk across the street, and serve your neighbor. And then the funeral was filled with additional inspiring accounts of how this faithful woman recognized and responded to the extraordinary calls and also the ordinary occasions of those with her and her sphere of influence. So we can keep our sights on the goal to lift our brothers and sisters from poverty, but let us not forget those within our sphere of influence, because that's where it truly begins. And we have the opportunity to serve in such a way. And the Lord is very purposeful in his placement of where you are and where I am and what we are doing in our lives and who we know for a reason. He knows who you will affect, and he knows how you will be influenced. There's a purpose for your placement. So look around you and see what that looks like. Where can you contribute? Where can you love? Where can you serve? Because he's placed you there for a reason, and you have a mission and a purpose there, and he loves you. I'm grateful we have the opportunity to give and to serve in this space. And I know that our Savior Jesus Christ is aware of us. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Nadini?
Hi, everyone. Hello. Hi. So I'm probably the least qualified to be on this dais, but yeah, I'm a student. I'm a final year law student. But I worked with a couple of NGOs in the past 5 years. I worked with Amnesty International as well as national NGOs like Navdara and Guardians of Dreams. So talking about poverty, so dictionaries define poverty as a state of being inadequate in quality and amount. But in my opinion, poverty has two distinct planes. One is of the material aspect, and the other is the most conveniently overlooked, which is the mental health aspect, which Lonny had obviously stated in earlier. So material poverty is created by greedy people hoarding the wealth of a nation for no sensible reason. And these privileged few find a way to do it through social, political, or religious means. And any solution to no poverty has to address ways to redistribute this stolen booty to its rightful owners. So to give an example for better perspective, India, where I come from, is actually cited as a poor nation who is still on the path of development. But history will tell you that we have had unimaginable riches which has been looted from our people by hordes of conquerors, starting from Alexander, then the Vandals of Mongolia, and the Thugs from Persia, right down to the Europeans, no offense. The last being the British, who successfully bled us for more than 2 centuries. So these colonial rulers have done the same to poor African as well as Latin American countries. But in spite of all these hardships, India has become the world's 5th largest economy recently, thanks to its poor people. Well, even at the present, while we are looking at it, most developed countries or developing nations per se are still growing by looting the poor. I'm a believer of the concept of poverty paradox, which is a classical identity of the global poverty which exists at hand. So most developing countries like India will have in the foreseeable future the domestic resources to address absolute poverty at the national level. And this I mean by clothing, basic resources like food, water, shelter. However, poverty is still then likely to persist despite those available resources due to the prevailing patterns and trends in inequality. which may weaken the poverty-reducing power of economic growth. So what I would like to say is that the rise of a prosperous country's income does not eradicate the poverty for the poorest people in the country. Here, I'd like to quote something that Professor Andy Sumner from the King's College London stated in his research. He said that the poverty paradox suggests a reframing of global poverty away from the traditional aid based on resource transfer towards policies of national redistribution. For example, giving impoverished children access to better education and funding it through taxes of the wealthy is one method to reduce inequality while simultaneously encouraging future growth and poverty reduction. I'd like to just end by saying that redistributive measures might also assist to close the wealth gap in nations with high inequality, whereas social as well as political conflicts or the advent of populist regimes could be detrimental to a long-term progress that we are looking at. Thank you.
Javier, adelante.
Was mentioning how structured has, I wish I had had that structured narrative when I was a student. So Nadini, well, it's a brilliant future ahead for you and for all of us, having you in decision positions. Well, and thank you for the opportunity. I think I'm very, very glad to be here. It's an honor in such a relevant convention and conference. Well, you asked me, Lonny, about poverty. And I think it's mandatory to refer to the Nobel Prize of Economy, Amartya Sen, okay, by the way, Indian ancestor, who redefined poverty as multidimensional, as you mentioned. We cannot keep on measuring poverty only by the approach of the World Bank, only about the lack of dollars a day, which is also a component, but not the only one. Also, the emotional component is critical as well to mention. But mainly what he talked about is the lack of capacities of people to make a free deployance of the human rights, okay, and deploy their strategies of life. So lacking of these capacities on a rental approach, but also capacities in access to education, to health, to the right institutions, to be represented by, that defend also the capacity, for example, the gender capacity and empowerment to deploy also the human rights, children's rights. All these elements I think, are the best definition of poverty so far. Okay, and they need to be used as a framework for policy making. They need to be used as a framework for business making. I mean, and so I think that is a very, very good standard also to measure how we are reducing poverty. As a matter of fact, United Nations, specifically with the UNDP program, defined the concept of human development and the Human Development Index to measure how we are reducing or not poverty in all these dimensions, which is an index that has been evolved over time. Now we are talking specifically, well, there's a legacy of Amartya Sen working at the Oxford University, but a worldwide transversal working group with many universities, many scholars working there, talking about how important is also the measurement. How do we need to really measure poverty at the household level? Okay, we cannot measure it at national level, not even at an aggregated level. We need to go to the households to know which are the capacities that are lacking for people to make the deployance of their own human rights and their strategies of life. So that is critical. It's critical that we understand that poverty needs to be acted, reduced, and measured at the grassroots, at the household, and operate at a local grassroots level. Okay, in coherence with other levels of governance, of course, and multi-level coherence is going to be critical to operate also top-down, at a regional, at a national level, creating the right frameworks to attract finance, to attract because there's the lack of attraction of investment in poverty countries, in poor countries, less developed countries, as the World Bank defines and the OECD defines, is critical. So the capacity to attract finance at a scale-up level is going to be crucial, and that is done at a national level usually, or at aggregated level. But that needs to be routed properly to the grassroots. I mean, there's no trickle-down effect. You cannot operate, okay, we're attracting finance, okay, everything's going to prove right. No. You need to address the right policies, the right measures, mobilize the right fiscal policies, mobilize the right resources, put in place the right financial mechanisms, using the blended mechanisms to attract finance, using soft resources from ODA to cover the most risky aspects of investment in LDCs, in less developed countries, to leverage private investment, okay, who is not ready to assume the risk, but they would be ready to go if soft resources could cover the most risky areas. So blended finance for that is going to be critical. So understanding that you need to go local, you need to go grassroots is going to be critical. But there's another paradigmatic opportunity here, because Amartya Sen redefined poverty time ago. But now what's going on, especially with the SDG agenda, is that what is being redefined is also wealth. And also that is critical. That's the real revolution. If we are able also to redefine wealth as multidimensional, not only the return in the short term only of financial indicators, but have the right social and environmental impacts of the wealth generation processes at a scale level, that is what we are going to be really in position to create a revolution, right? And achieve well, the challenges that humanity and the planet we are facing. So we need to incorporate social and environmental aspects in the way business community operates, right? And start, and it's going to be critical to referring to what you introduced first, Lonny, the collaboration between the public institutions to put in place the right public policies, business community to start collaborating, making the right decisions and also ready to partner, civil society to make it go grassroots, and academy. Academy is going to be critical to provide the right knowledge, the right taxonomies, the right methodologies to be able to be really impacting positively in poverty reduction.
Excellent. Thank you all very much for your comments on that. We have a couple of questions that we want to ask. First, maybe I'll share. I grew up in what would be considered a poor family in rural Idaho. And yet, I didn't view myself as being poor other than the fact that people made fun of us because we wore the same clothes every day to school. But compared to what I grew up with and what I've seen as I've traveled and worked in the developing countries, my poverty was not an oppressive poverty, and I had options. And that's what we want to think about. How can we help people have options, but also how can we help them have the mindset? One of our directors in Guatemala used to always say, poverty starts in the mind. Okay? So how can we help people change their mindset so they don't say, I am poor, or I'm a poor person, but they say, I have limited situation right now, but I can get out of poverty. The other thing is helping people recognize their resources. And I want to share a little anecdote with you that I heard growing up that I love. It's about a farmer in rural Oklahoma, just barely eking out a living, wasn't doing very well, and especially on the far end of his property there was a little slough, a little wet area that just stunk, and he never even went down near that. He heard about the opportunity to go to Alaska and mine gold and get rich. So he sold his farm, got enough money, went to Alaska, froze to death for a couple of years, and decided, I'm not getting rich and I'm hating Alaska. It's too cold up here, and he went back to Oklahoma to see what he could do there. As he pulled into where his farm used to be, big, beautiful mansion, beautiful, everything was really nice, and he's like, holy cow, how in the world did the guy that I sold this farm to do this? And he went and he asked him. And the guy said, well, you know, I was wandering around the farm and I went down to that slough and it just stunk so bad. And I was like, I don't like this. And so I went to the county extension agent and I said, can you come look at this? And the guy came and looked and he took a sample and it turned out it was crude oil. And so what the farmer had sold is he had sold a very profitable oil production area. And the guy that bought it became rich. Now, the reason I tell this anecdote is because many people who are in impoverished situations have resources. They just don't recognize them. Now, I'm wearing this tie on purpose today. It was given to me by the Ethiopian Institute for Agriculture Research when I did a presentation on artificial insemination and embryo transfer of dairy cattle. I took a bunch of embryos, frozen embryos from the United States over to Ethiopia to put in their cows so that instead of producing a liter of milk a day, they could produce 40 liters of milk a day. But in my presentation, after working with the rural farmers in Ethiopia, I didn't tell them that they needed to do more artificial insemination and embryo transfer. I told them they needed to teach the farmers that milk is 88% water, and if they want their cows to produce more milk, they need to provide more clean water for them all day long, not just once a day. And so there are simple solutions that we can implement if we think about it. Some of it's educational, some of it's coordinating, but let's think about what are options that people have. Help them recognize their potential, because they've got to believe that they can change their lives first. And second of all, what are resources that they have at their disposal? And when you think about when we go and do things for people, they're not growing and developing. As we work with people, we want to do things with them and through them. So, Kristin, I'd just like to ask you a little bit more on how can religious organizations, or how does teaching something about a higher creator or teaching religious principles, how does that solve the poverty problem?
It's a good question. I have to think about myself. How does that help me to help others? How does it help me to pull myself out of situations where I need to also be empowered? And the thought that came to mind is that knowing who we are changes how we think about ourselves and what our potential is. Knowing who we are as children of God changes how you think about yourself and what you think you can do, your vision for yourself. I grew up on a little bit of a farm too. I actually grew up in Sacramento, California, but my mother moved us to Burley, Idaho, in the middle of nowhere. So we went from cities and highways and byways to Orchard. And we learned a lot about hard work and putting those sprinkler lines and canning the fruit and doing a lot of things. And that hard work taught me that I could do something. I could change a space, a physical space at that point, but also taught me about I could change a physical space. I learned about my own potential. I also learned about my Heavenly Father as a teenager much more, and what He thought of me and His love for me. When you're loved, think about if there's somebody in your life that believed in you. Think of somebody in your life that had an influence in your heart, that really believed in you, and how that changed about how you thought about yourself and what you could do. To your point, Lonny, we have to understand who we are and our potential. And sometimes that love of others can help us feel that and understand that. You have that power in yourself also to influence others, to help them see their potential and their vision and what they can do. Because if you believe it, they're going to feel that, and they're going to believe that too, because it's possible, because that's a truth. And so I just want to share maybe a quote from President Ezra Taft Benson, who talks about working from the inside out, which I'm kind of talking to right now. He says, "The Lord works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. The world would take the people out of the slums. Christ would take the slums out of the people, and then take themselves out of the slums. The world would mold men by changing their environment. Christ changes men who change their environment. The world would shape human behavior, but Christ can change human nature." There's a lot of the potential is right here in each of us. It's powerful. If we understand who we are, we can make that change, and understanding who loves us can change how we do things and why we do things and give us the motivation.
Great, thank you. Nadini, when I think of India, there are two things that come to mind right away. I met several years ago a lady by the name of Becky Douglas who had been to India and seen the leper colonies. And she decided she was going to do something. She created a nonprofit organization called Rising Star, and she and hundreds have gone over and just loved lepers. And they tell some of the most amazing stories of how wonderful they feel as they work with the lepers. And sometimes we forget that richness can come from us serving other people. The other thing I think about in India is a colleague of mine had a neighbor who saw the need for increasing women's education there. And they started a small school for girls. And now, after numerous years, it's a full university with graduate programs too for girls. And so small incremental steps over time can build and grow. Maybe what other things are you seeing that that people can do to change people's lives?
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you. So, I'm a student. I've been in law school for the past 5 years. So, something that I am very passionate about is giving back to the society. And for the past maybe 5 years back, my family wasn't in a good financial situation. My dad had just lost his job, and my mom was not working back then. Because we have a society, we as a society don't see women working. And my mom got married off at 18 years old. So she never completed her graduate studies, and finding a job back then was really hard. Back then, it's something that my mom said to me. So first year of law school, I wanted to start working. And then my mom was like, no, you should start volunteering. I was like, why? No, you'll feel good about it. But that's stuck with me. And I personally feel like it's made a huge change in my life. I've met so many people, I've given so much to the society. I feel good at the end of the day. Even though it's nothing material, it's just the feeling that stays with us. And the state that I come from, it's Kerala. It's the most educated state in India. So when we go to the northern side, it's definitely bad over there. So I have been privileged in a lot of ways that a lot of other girls don't get. So that is something that I'm extremely grateful for, and that is something that I want to work for in the future. And as you said, we have a lot of slum colonies, and I've been to them with regard to my projects. And there is something about them, about the children over there, their smile that lights up your faces the entire day. Oh my God. They're happy with the tiniest of things. You bring them a packet of crayons, they're happy for the entire month. It's delightful. There was this one time, it was my sister's birthday. These kids arranged a dance program for her. I was so amazed by the whole thing. It was overwhelming. That's the kind of mental effort that they have towards you. And it changes your perspective on life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadini. And I do need to take exception with one thing that you said. Early on when you started, you said you were probably the least qualified person on the panel. I don't like to look at things that way. You have an amazing set of experiences that none of the rest of us do, and a perspective that we don't have. So you are very qualified to be on this panel. Javier, you mentioned a couple things that intrigued me. You talked about growing capacity and how we can do that, and then also how businesses can be involved. Can we get investment involved? One of the organizations that I love that's coming out of Peru, it's called Agros, and what they're doing is they send a technician out to the rural farmers and do a little evaluation of the farmers and give him a profile. And then with that profile, he can then go to the bank and they recognize collateral that he has. And so now we're starting to bring the poor people into society a little bit because we've given them a profile. And what we've noticed in that field is that that poorer level are much more likely to pay off their small loans, higher percentage of them pay off their small loans than the other sectors. But how are other ways maybe that businesses can start being involved in resolving this? And maybe one thing that we can help them do is recognize that right now the poor people don't buy anything from them. But if the poor people increase their standard of living, all of a sudden they've got billions of customers. So anyway, go ahead.
Thank you, Lonny. Thank you very much. And well, very impressive all the previous interventions. So I would like to add also before answering to that, and I will get to that because it's critical what you have pointed out, Lonny. But I would like to zoom out a little bit. Also be aware on the downside that we are far behind achieving the SDG 1. I mean, the pandemic has hit very hard the evolution. We were doing it well. We were reducing poverty at a 10% rate on a yearly basis. Now we are not even 0.1 reducing. And now resuming some momentum, but the pandemic hit especially the most vulnerable territories and communities in a very hard way. So we are far behind. We won't be able to achieve the last report, the Secretary General of the last high-level political forum mentioned that we won't make it by 2030 unless we put in place in the next 18 months the right policies and the right involvement of business and the right capacity to partner to achieve, at a scale-up exponential level, poverty reduction. So that's the downside of all this. And one element to be able to scale it up at an exponential level, you were mentioning before, I think it starts at individual level. Not only, but it's critical. For that, and just to add a little bit to the previous interventions, I would refer, yesterday we had a lovely dinner hosted by Baldomero and Nadini, a lovely one. And we were able to talk about the research of an anthropologist. It's a global reference, top-notch one. In his research about Homo sapiens evolution, their main conclusion of this research was that humankind was able to evolve over time, not for being stronger than any other species in the planet. It was because our capacity to love, to find empathy, compassion, whatever way you want to frame it. And that capacity to feel empathy helped us to collaborate, to start finding the right solutions for the common interest. And that's how we prevailed in a planet not being stronger than a mammoth, for example. We have lost that capacity to collaborate. We have lost that capacity to feel empathy, love. And human rights, at the end, are just a formalization of the concept of love, compassion, or empathy. So we need to get back to that, and that remains to the individual level. So all what you are mentioning is critical. What you are mentioning were drivers for transformation, for individual transformation, to have the conscious that we are in a change of age. We are in a moment that we need to wake up, and we're in a moment that we're facing urgent limits to human prevalence in planet. So love, religious approach, or arts, or culture, all those are drivers to wake up. So we need to, first, that is critical. Second is that we need to start understanding we need to be ready to find the connections. First, we need to look at reality, understanding the interlink between the social aspects, the economic aspects, the environmental aspects, and the human aspects. All of them come as a whole. Only the model that we have been deploying, the model of growth, was short-term and linear, which tore apart all these aspects because they were not valued, not interesting for the immediate return of investment. We need to put them together again. We need to understand that, and for that we need to, academy is going to be critical, to bring the right capacities for people to understand that reality comes as a whole. We cannot tackle environmental aspects if we don't reduce poverty, if we don't reduce inequalities. Otherwise we will be, and all this is systemic thinking, and this is critical for all the students, so academy is going to be critical. And that is leveling the ground for collaboration. Now, I was referring before, we are redefining wealth. And now we live in such a hyper-connected world that no business, if they want to prevail successfully in deploying their own business strategies, can dismanage their impacts in the society where they operate. So, and that's very interesting. That gives us a very high opportunity, because now all the business methodologies of management understand that in order to provide the right signals for their stakeholders, in order to create value for the investors, for the supply chains, for their employees, for the consumers, they need to manage properly their social and environmental impacts in a double way. First, they need to integrate sustainability not only in their CSR department. They need to integrate it in every decision, in every corner of the company. They need to manage, first they need to know how they're impacting social and environmental aspects, and they need to manage them properly. So it's not about the CSR director, it's the people of value chain, the people who are managing the production cycle, the people who are managing the logistics. They need to understand that and manage it properly. So by that way, we will understanding that we are creating positive impacts. And if we operate in the context of poverty, our involvement in managing properly our impacts in poverty reduction is going to be critical to create value to our stakeholders. And second, once our company is able to manage properly, they are ready to engage in partnerships. And that is critical in any economy, in any society, but specifically in the poverty context. For the poverty context, there's one element that you have mentioned, which is also a key, is that we are not working with the poor, quote to quote. We need to, what the OECD called, we need to put in place proper measures of wealth generation. We need to work in poverty context by creating products and services for the people who are below the rate of poverty. We need to involve them in the wealth generation processes. As workers, as consumers, they need to be part of them. And as you mentioned, the market of working in the proper scenarios is huge. So now there's a business trend which is very critical, which is to operate, to create products, services, and work with people in poverty conditions, to incorporate them as producers, as consumers, as clients, so be part of the wealth generation process. So all these are elements that can start scaling up. But the main one, Lonny, and with this I will end, is that we start collaborating at the territory, at the local level. For that, SDG localization is going to be critical to help to deploy common visions between the public sector, business community, civil society, and academy, ground them together, work together to find a joint mission and put in place a roadmap that can be robust in the long term to find how do we see this territory in the long term. How do we innovate in this together? How we provide the right technologies, the right resources, the right visions, and the right understanding of how do we make it happen here in our territory. And that, in a plan, is what will be able to attract the interest of finance in order to create the right incentives to start advancing, reducing poverty, reducing the environmental challenges, the social challenges, and the economic challenges of a territory in the context of LDC. There's no trickle down. It needs to be bottom up. and needs to work at different levels, but needs to be, and our capacity to deploy commonly in a joint collaboration between all these players in a territory is going to be critical. For that, the SDGs are an excellent framework to collaborate and to find common goals with targets, with indicators, without rhetoric approaches, with action-oriented approaches, to start giving solutions to poverty reduction, and bottom-up contributing also to the challenges, the global challenges, by making it happen at the local level.
Great, thank you very much, Javier. Great ideas. You know, and I can't thank Baldomero and, of course, Adina, because she's at his side, and and the others that have put on this conference, because as we talk and as we understand different challenges in different areas and we see different solutions, we can start implementing those solutions. And, you know, as we start speaking the same language, and I love what, you know, Kristin's pointed out, how important it is that we love ourselves to begin with. We recognize our own value as individuals. And then as we look at the person that we see, recognize their value, that they are a very important person. They have value. It doesn't matter what they're wearing, what their hairstyle is, that they have value. And then as we take it to a larger level, speaking other language, you know, like Javier's talking about, you know, if we can capture the power of the private industry, but, you know, what's their language? Their language is money. So we have to help them see how doing these things will bring them long-term financial benefit. And it does. It's been proven that as we improve society, it increases customers, it increases everything about business. And then with the public sector, as we think about the public sector, they like to stay in power. They like things constant and that. So we encourage them to understand that when people come out of poverty, there are less problems with government. There aren't riots. There aren't bloqueos. What's a bloqueo? Strikes. You know, there aren't problems like that caused by the poor people that have just had enough. So we help them to understand, hey, if you can get policies in place, and it's us that goes and helps them to understand what the policies can be, then you'll have a better society. We've just got a minute or two. If any of you have questions, maybe come up here to the mic real quick. And state your name and
Is it on now? Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Hassan. I'm a UN Youth Representative for the World Coercion Organization, and I go to Lehigh University. I just have some comments and then a question. Before I ask my question, I can't remember exactly who said it, but I think I heard one of the panelists say that poverty is in the mind, that it's a sort of mindset. And I'm a little bit disappointed to hear that here, because poverty is a structural issue, and the first step to solving that issue is to stop blaming those who are in poverty. The system doesn't work for everyone, that's a reality. And until we accept that reality and stop victim blaming, we can move forward. But anyway, I want to thank the Latter-day Saints Church for its donation to the World Food Program. It's been mentioned a couple of times here, so we've heard about it. But poverty is a structural issue, and these donations in themselves are merely Band-Aid and not treating the root causes of poverty. So my question is what the church is doing to address these structural issues, especially for people in certain demographics that might be more likely to grow up in poverty, especially from like certain racial backgrounds. Because we often talk about poverty in the global south, but poverty is an issue here as well in the US. And I recently read an article that investigated access to welfare benefits here in Utah. And it basically said that people growing up in poverty have to join the church to have access to it, even if they wouldn't believe or stand for the values that the church stands for. Just to quote from the many articles that are out there, it said, an investigation by the nonprofit journalism collaborative ProPublica reveals that a thread running through Utah's approach to the poor is just not, it's not just that they are unworthy unless they have a job, but they are unworthy unless they are, or pretend to be, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. To me, that seems pretty problematic, and is yet another example of how root structural problems contribute to the issue. So to reiterate my question, how does the church aim to address this here in Utah, since they play such a huge role apparently, and what steps does it take to structurally contribute to the solutions? Thank you.
Kristin, do you want to take a stab at that?
Thank you for your question. It's a great question. And there are many things, and it kind of excites me that you asked this question because there are so many things the church is doing to make sure that we can build from a structural perspective, starting with education and starting with also mental and therapy and well-being situations. So I just wanted a couple of the things that I actually personally witnessed. For instance, you see those are industries that are around the states. And those that come to that place are coming from usually a hard spot. And they don't have to be members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to work there or to receive the benefits or the opportunities in this space. They can come and they can learn and they can have a mentorship there and to be able to have a spot where someone can help them see their potential and to grow in that space and to also gain a path for employment and look at their barriers and work with them on those barriers so that they can achieve, because they can come from places where they don't have opportunity, and those kind of programs help them see their potential, help somebody mentor them and bring them up to that space. And again, it's not limited to just members, which is why the Church of Jesus Christ does what it does, because we want to help all children. Another service is addiction recovery, which is fantastic as well, because if we're not able to take care of ourselves in that space, we're not able to look outward and to be able to help those around us or ourselves and our families. Addiction recovery, there's about 2,800 recovery programs meeting per week in countries, 30 countries in 17 different languages, and 304,405 people just this last year were a part of those. And part of the statistics in that is the CRD did a study. They found significant decreases in the participants' primary addictive behavior in the last years. So these like structural parts of it. So, and also education. BYU Pathways is an excellent program which doesn't look for just the people who have regular access to education. They look at those families that are working full time, that have food insecurity, that are unable to access education in the right and maybe a more stereotypical way. We look for those that don't have access to that space. And they don't have to be members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's a beautiful program. I just want to share a little bit about that if I can, because I also have witnessed this in both my family members' lives and friends of other faiths be blessed and benefit by this. And I hope that you can share the word as well. This is an opportunity for education for all of God's children. Let's see here. There are 60,000 students in 180 countries, and it's a distinctive student population. The majority projected to be international by 2027. Adult learners averaging between 30 and 36. They are experiencing unstable housing, usually single parents, and in different spaces. And they're successfully being able to graduate with university-accredited degrees in all around the world and in spaces. And as single parents, there's a way to work through that in this program. It's set up to help those that don't have access to education. So that's another space we are doing. And there's so many other programs as well, and I'd be happy to go into more detail about that. But I'm so glad you asked the question, because we want to help all of our God's children, and in a structural way to also recognize those things weigh on the human soul when we don't have what we need. That hurts. That we recognize that. And we try to hit both the temporal side of assisting with that aid that is immediate, but also the beginning part of that. How do we empower them to take themselves out of those circumstances? And that is for all of God's children.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent question. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but for those of you who have questions, I'm sure you could come ask the panelists afterwards. Two things that I'd like to mention. One, when we talk about civil society organizations, sometimes we start becoming critical of what a different society is doing because they're not doing what we want to do. And we start tearing each other down, and we can't do that. We've got to support each other. And sometimes there's going to be conflicting things going on. I worked with a farmer in Kenya named Julius, and he was raising maize or corn, and he'd get these little ears of corn like this with a few pieces of corn on them, and he could just barely feed his family. And we went in and we taught him, and we gave him some improved seeds of corn, GMO corn, and he was growing plants that would have 2 ears of corn on them instead of 1, and the ears would be about 12 inches long and full of corn. So we 10 times his ability to raise food for his family. Now, some people may be critical of that and say, well, why are you giving this guy GMO corn? And I would answer back, he would rather have plenty to eat if it's GMO than starve to death by having organic. And so sometimes there are conflicting things as we're in this space. We need to listen to each other. We need to support each other. We need to work together, and we can attack and solve this problem of poverty. Thank you so much.